Welcome back to the Hidden History Happy Hour, everybody. I'm back home in beautiful Gig Harbor, Washington. Cheers, Alex.
Cheers. Good to see you.
How's your summer treating you?
We haven't really had one so far in the UK. It's mid-August. It's shaping up to be our rainiest August of all time.
But also you're going into the 2-month vacation season.
Well, for some people, yeah. I will, of course, not be vacationing for 2 months, but yes, we are.
Yeah, it's tough with the research schedule for the show to get away.
Really what's really keeping me up. You're right.
Those stacks of books in your dad's library, they're just sitting there taunting
not going to read
you.
themselves. We unimaginatively, I've gone back to G-Vine. I'm having a refreshing gin and tonic to try and convince myself that it is summer. But I am conscious, I'm aware that we don't talk enough about booze on the podcast, and indeed that I've been rather dull in my choices of late. So next time, I promise I'm gonna have an exotic drink or more imaginative one.
And we'll talk about it. And I have an exotic drink to talk about in the break involving, if you can imagine such a thing, gin. So this is my first 2 separate cocktail episode because I'm starting off with the nice Sauvignon Blanc, but I'm going to switch to this and it will be apparent why. But Alex, you always like to get us started with the story right out of the block. So if you will, sir, release the bees.
I will release the bees. The Romans were fond of fighting wars against Mithridates, and I checked the pronunciation, Mithridates of Pontus. Spoiler alert, as usual with the Romans, they got their man and indeed his empire in the end. But Mithridates and his allies certainly made Rome sweat for the win. In the longest and the last of the Mithridatic Wars, 73 to 63 BC, so it's a 10-year conflict we're talking about, the Romans laid siege to Themyscira, which was a tough nut to crack. And after other measures had failed, the Romans, seemingly unable to go over the walls of the city, decided to go under it. The Romans were led by Lucullus, as much beloved by Rome for the unbelievable amount of booty with which he returned from campaigns. As for the victories he notched up for them, the Roman army dug a huge and deep network of tunnels to both undermine the great walls of the city and potentially allow them to penetrate the city from within without having to scale them. But the plucky Pontian Empire, realizing what Lucullus was up to, dug tunnels of their own, successfully designed and implemented to intersect with the tunnels dug by the Romans. And they unleashed all manner of wild animals from the city into the tunnels, forcing them down towards Lucullus's men. And I don't just mean angry dogs or such either. These creatures were so varied as to include, at one end of the size spectrum, swarms of bees, and at the other, enormous bears. And said animals, the annals record, duly attacked the Romans. I suppose you kind of encourage them on their way with smoke and so forth. But anyway, it's true in the end, the Themyscirans lost. And they lost so hard that their city was ground into the dust. So thoroughly did they lose that debate about where that city was is not precisely agreed upon by the experts who study the period. But that is not the point. First, we mark the ingenuity of the defenders in stopping at nothing in what they would throw at the Romans. Unleash the bees, fight them, Romans. But secondly, imagine the feeling of the attackers. You are on your umpteenth campaign against this Pontic mob. This one's been going 10 years. You've fought battles, you've dug the tunnels you've been ordered to dig. It's hot, you're tired, you're lugging armor on, you've got 100 bee stings on you. And wait, what's this? Of course, it's an angry bear coming at me down the tunnel. So look, it's too well a known lesson to stress, but given that they overcame this too, I note that in their prime, the Roman legions really did know what they were about.
Yeah, great story. I forgot about this story. I flagged it a year ago for us to do, and then I sort of forgot about it. But I'm making up for that by something I'm going to show everybody in a minute, which is my homage to the bees and also to the second story we're going to talk about today. But it definitely brings to mind one seemingly obvious military tactics question, Alex. Why didn't they just shove dirt in the tunnel on the other side?
Well, because they were trying to actively... Oh, you mean the Romans?
Why didn't the defenders, every time the Romans dug a tunnel, fill it with dirt?
Well, you're
instead
going
of
to run out
bees.
of dirt, right? Because you're in a
You're in a
relatively
walled city.
small
Yeah.
city. You're in a walled city, and there's only so much stuff you've got, and they're going to break down those barriers. But also, I'm sure they did that too. I got a couple of interesting footnotes on this one. Mithridates was really no slouch, and the example I gave in the book. By the way, this is a story that's only in the book. I never told this one on Twitter.
Hmm.
Um,
Bonus.
yeah. Just an example that shows how far ahead of his time he was. Mithridates was alive to the prospect of his enemies seeking to use poisons upon him so as to render him no longer alive. And he was therefore in the habit of regularly ingesting small amounts of various poisons so as to build up an immunity against them. Now, he lacked, of course, the knowledge of modern medicine, which tells us how useful vaccination and low dosage approaches to substances can be. And his acquaintances must have thought this a pretty weird hobby, but the logic is absolutely sound.
Yeah, not only absolutely sound, but homaged in a film I don't think we've talked about on the show, Alex, but I think you and I both love The Princess Bride.
Yeah,
Um,
you love it. I like it. But yeah, good film.
okay. Well, in any event, the book's terrible, by the way, which I hate to say because it's one of my favorite screenwriters. Book's terrible, but there's this famous moment with Wallace Shawn where he's sitting there with the cups of poison, and he says, "Obviously, never trade cups of poison with a Sicilian. I've been ingesting small amounts for years." So I don't know. Maybe
Oh, I
the writers.
see.
Oh yeah,
Yeah,
yeah, yeah,
great reference.
yeah.
Yeah,
So
gosh,
maybe the
good.
writers.
That's really good. Okay. But as we're going high history, low culture, I will also point out that Themyscira is nothing to do with the city of the same name in the Wonder Woman stories, in the films and the books.
Yeah,
Total
well,
coincidence.
I didn't even know that was in the Wonder Woman book.
There you
So
go.
hopefully that'll be of value to some of our listeners. The also question that this raises for me, talking like Yoda today. Another question this raises for me is how do you corral bees?
Yeah. So I imagine that they use bees for honey, like everyone else, and then I doubt they got away without stings themselves, right? But you take the entire hive down to your bit of the tunnel,
Mhm.
and then chuck it and blow smoke and encourage the bees to go in the other direction. But I mean, resourceful, right?
Oh yeah, love it. And speaking of honey, as we were, Alex, ask
Uh-huh.
me why I'm sitting here with a bowl of honey.
Bryan, why are you sitting there with a bowl of honey?
It's a hell of a good question. That's why you're such a great podcast host. This is not just honey, it's honey and lime juice. And this is gin, which, as you know, is not really my favorite. But once again, Alex, I'm sacrificing myself for the show
You're a
because,
man of the people.
yes, I am. Honey has not just one tie in to this show, but two tie ins to this show. Because, first of all, bees. Second of all, I want to spend a little bit of time talking about what in my country is now a huge phenomenon, as we're calling it here, Barbieheimer. Are you familiar with
Oh
this term,
God, yeah,
Barbieheimer?
I am. I am.
Painfully,
Yeah.
yeah. So I didn't. I have to confess, I did not do this. I would have done it, except my lovely fiance would not put up with it. But the thing in the U.S. is to go to both Barbie and Oppenheimer in the same day, and
Back
it's
to
like
back.
back to back, and it's like a 6-hour ordeal. And there's been T-shirts made, and these two movies are going to collectively be some of the most profitable movies of all time. So there's
It's
something to
amazing,
it.
isn't it?
Yeah,
Yeah,
even though no
they've
marketing engineer came up with it,
yeah.
just was organic, right? So let me get back to the booze. I got my martini glass chill. I got ice all over my floor. What I am going to make here is the Oppenheimer, or as it's
Ah,
known, the Oppi. And in fact, Alex, when you go to see this movie, which I know painfully you haven't yet, it's a
yeah.
great movie. You should see it.
Very
There's a
long,
scene
but yeah,
where
yeah.
your countryman playing Oppenheimer with a perfect American accent makes what was called at Los Alamos in the 40s the Oppi, which is a very special martini in which he mixed honey and lime juice, and he coated his chilled martini glass with it. And there's a
Which
scene
is
in the
being done.
movie.
If you're listening to us, not watching, it's being done in
Yes,
front of me now.
very sorry. You got to watch this one, guys, because it's a good bar tip. So you coat it with the honey and lime, and then you pour the chilled gin in the chilled glass, which is what I'm showing
So you
our
don't dunk a
viewers.
whole load of honey and lime in. It's just around the rim, and I can see
It's
it going
almost
at the
it's
legs of the honey and lime going down into the martini now.
It's like with the margarita where you put salt around it.
Right.
It's liquid, so it goes inside. And this was Oppenheimer was famous for this, and it's portrayed in the film. And so,
Honey and lime, and then you got a straight gin martini.
straight. Well, theoretically, you could put vermouth in it, but why? I think his vermouth. I just was reading about this. I think Oppenheimer's vermouth to gin ratio was like 7-1. So I figured, why bother? So
It adds a little something. I actually find sometimes people think they're making a great martini, and it's basically they've shown the glass, the vermouth bottle, and then put it back in the cupboard. I actually like a bit of vermouth. I like mine not too dry. But
well, you've seen me order vodka martinis this way, Alex, where I'll say, if there's a bottle of vermouth on the shelf of the bar next door, close enough.
Right.
Close enough.
Right. So how is it? How is it?
I'm gonna cheers to Robert Oppenheimer and the film, which we can talk about in a second. Definitely plant-based, which is not my thing. And yet pretty nice for a summer day.
The honey reminds me, you and I were in a bar once with somebody who was trying to order a particular well-known brand of Tennessee whiskey. And they had recently had the honey version and were saying, no honey, don't give me the honey one. We were in a foreign language bar, and each time they thought this person was asking for the honey version. And I don't know if they went out and found honey and put more honey in it, and it got angrier and angrier.
Yeah.
I just found it so funny. We were all half cut anyway, but it was just as glass after glass of what was not wanted was produced.
Extra honey, honey. Yeah.
Extra honey.
Yeah, it was funny. So I want to talk briefly about Oppenheimer and the invention of the atomic bomb, because not only is it, of course, very historically important, but also a company that you and I are very close to has publicly stated that the development of large language models and artificial intelligence prospectively could be as dangerous as the development of the atomic bomb.
Yes.
So it's very, and also, of course, it's very hot topic here in the US right now. So I'm pleased to say my lovely fiance gets me every month a history newsletter, which always includes primary source material.
Oh.
For our viewers, you can see that the word secret is crossed out on this document, and it's now, our viewers can see, unclassified. It's been unclassified since 1965. This is the primary surviving written record of an eyewitness to the Trinity atomic bomb test at 5:30 a.m. on 16 July in 1945. The very first time the world saw an atomic bomb go off. So I'm just going to read a couple excerpts of it, and then maybe we'll talk a bit about the implications.
Yeah, go ahead.
This is by Colonel L.W. Alvarez. I was kneeling between the pilot and co-pilot in a B-29 number 384. By the way, same type of plane that dropped the bombs on Hiroshima and Nagasaki, and observed the explosion through the pilot's window on the left side of the plane. We were about 20 to 25 miles from the site, and the cloud cover between us was approximately 7 out of 10. About 30 seconds before the object was detonated, the clouds obscured our vision to the point that we did not see the initial stage of the fireball. I was looking through cross Polaroid glasses directly at the site. My first sensation was one of intense light covering my entire field of vision. This seemed to last for about 1/2 second, after which I noted an intense orange-red glow through the clouds. Several seconds later, it appeared that a second spherical fireball appeared, and shortly after that, a third. This thing disappeared a few seconds later, and what seemed to be another fireball appeared, and I'm now convinced that this was all the same fireball, which I saw on 2 separate occasions through a new hole in the airplane. When this third fireball disappeared, the light intensity dropped considerably, and with another 20 seconds or so, the clouds started to push up through the undercast. It first appeared as a parachute, which was being blown up by a large electric fan, which I think is a great description. After the hemispherical cap had emerged through the cloud layer, one could see a cloud of smoke about 1/3 the diameter of the parachute, covering the bottom of the hemisphere with the undercast. This had very much the appearance of a large mushroom. So in the first written account, probably done within hours of the detonation, this person had coined the phrase mushroom cloud, which lasted forever. I'm going to skip a bunch of this because one point of reading this is how dry and sort of like undramatic and scientific it is. It's not grappling with any of the greater, moral questions about it. In about 8 minutes, The top of the cloud was at approximately 40,000 feet.
How high were they flying at the time?
As close as I could estimate from our altitude of 24,000.
Good grief.
And the 40,000 seemed to be the maximum altitude attained by the cloud. I did not feel the shock wave hit the plane, but the pilot felt the reaction on the rudder through the rudder pedals. Some of the other passengers in the plane noted a rather small shock at the time, but it was not apparent to me. I'm attaching 2 sketches of the cloud, which I made at the time. So our viewers can see, obviously this is not the original, it's a copy, but this is the actual drawing that the first recorded observer of an atomic bomb made.
And it is the mushroom cloud.
Yeah, it's exactly the mushroom cloud. So I partly wanted to read that, to get out of the doghouse with my fiance, but also it's just kind of amazing to me how matter of fact and scientific the guy was. And of course, he was a trained professional scientist, but still, I'm sure there's a lot he didn't write down that he was thinking at that moment.
We, of course, went on to conduct various tests ourselves in the 1950s and indeed into the 1960s. And it was announced, as we record now in August 2023, it was announced last week, 2 weeks ago, that the veterans involved in that 70 years on will be getting a commemorative medal. I mean, we've really, got to move on, haven't we? I mean, I don't know how many of them are with us. And that cohort of veterans of serving military personnel in the British Armed Forces have had, I think, a number of medical issues and problems for which they've not received, I think, compensation. But we'll be happy to know 70 years late, they're getting some medals.
Yeah, that's a huge controversy that the film has generated here in the U.S. because there actually is a congressionally authorized, pretty fatly monetized fund for victims of nuclear testing, Bikini Atoll, et cetera.
Right.
For whatever loophole,
but not
crazy,
for the servicemen.
weird reason,
that.
But also, they're not giving it to the families of the residents of New Mexico who just happened to be living there and had no part in it, and they got cancer and all manner of other things. So that's going to be remedied, I think, pretty soon, because that's just scandalous.
Yeah, I agree. I was going to say so, but you recommend the movie?
Yes. So it's very talky. It's at least 3 hours long, although it doesn't seem like 3 hours when you're in it. But the cast is phenomenal. Matt Damon, Killian Hines, who's one of your, well, I guess he's Irish, so I don't know if you consider him a countryman or not, but he's an amazing actor, Peaky Blinders, etc.
I don't know if he's from the Northern Ireland or from the Republic, so
but we
gloss over.
He falls into the guy. I mean, I wanted to mention that I actually am so interested in this issue because I had a little brush with it in 1986 when the Chernobyl nuclear explosions happened. I was the Bulgarian political analyst for the CIA, which on the one hand, at 23 and a half, not a bad gig, but on the other hand, not exactly the hotbed of interest by the administration in the mid 80s.
Right.
Except that it turns out that the closest functional nuclear reactor to the reactors that exploded in Chernobyl were built by the Soviets in Bulgaria. So all of a sudden, Bulgaria was of huge interest. And so at 23 years old, I was able to go and brief the President Reagan, the rest of the War Cabinet or the National Security Cabinet, and Edward Teller, who by this point in 1986 was on President Reagan's Nuclear Weapons Advisory Committee. But of course, I met Teller, but of course he was at Los Alamos and he was a huge participant in the Manhattan Project. And, of course he was quite on in years by the time I met him, but he was sharp and he was acerbic and he was every bit as bombastic and opinionated as they portray him in the film.
That's great. Well, I have one more British point to make, which is that as far as and there was a debate in Parliament, I think, about whether these men would get compensation. They may have got some in the end, but I think, at least some of the merchant seamen involved who were on observing ships were not told what they were there for.
Yeah.
It's very close, as close as you can get really to guinea pig status for these guys. And they were miles away from the Christmas Island tests that we British were conducting in towards the end of the 50s. And this is a particular piece in the parliamentary debate that's really stuck with me, where there was this enormous black rain that fell, and after they'd seen the mushroom cloud, and the waters rocked up, and a whole load of dead fish got washed aboard. Not knowing the hazards, the men ate them.
Oh. One of the things that is, and again, I do recommend this movie if you like history and you like people talking in offices, which we do because we like The West Wing.
Right.
But one of the things that you normally would see at the end of a film like this is a lot of credit cards that say, you know, such and such went on to do this and that, and so died, and blah, blah, blah. And you don't get that in Oppenheimer. And what you especially don't get is any discussion of the physical health going forward of all the people in the Manhattan Project that observe this. I mean, these guys,
right,
at least as portrayed in the movie, like Matt Damon plays Leslie Groves, who was the military leader of the project. And these guys are just sitting there like 10 miles away with sunglasses on, basically.
Oh, the ship, the seamen I was mentioning to you were told to cover their eyes at the moment of the explosion. And the account of one of the guys says, "Well, I did, but I could see with absolute clarity the bones in my hand."
Oh, wow.
He could see each bone in his hand as he had it in front of his face.
Literally an X-ray. So I don't know what happened to all the service people, but I know that the civilians living in New Mexico at the time, still to this day, their families have not been compensated. So hopefully the movie will raise some awareness, and hopefully also we're not, with AI, we're not entering another apocalyptic age where we can destroy ourselves with not a lot of effort.
Well, we're going to wrap up, but I just give one thing on that point. We may be, because fascinating things happened in the UK where a ChatGPT variant was asked by scientists. They were trying to demonstrate, they were doing a paper on the risks of ChatGPT and the other systems in their field, and they produce vaccines for things. And so they just flipped the 1 for 0 and said to the chatbot, said to the AI, try and produce the most dangerous things you can think of. And they just left it to run overnight. And the next day it had spat out everything from anthrax to obscure conditions that people have yet to create. I mean, like hundreds and hundreds of communicable diseases and viruses and and it wouldn't be hard if you work your way down the list and you're a halfway decent scientist, even with limited facilities, you could make one of them because you've got literally hundreds of options to go at.
Yeah.
And basically instructions on how to do it. So
and you could probably ask it to say, take this list and tell me the ones I can make with stuff I can find at the local drugstore.
Exactly right. Well, let us think how much luckier those people were who lived in the days when all you needed to worry about was bees and bears coming at you down a tunnel.
Fair enough. All right, my friend.
Cheers, buddy.
Thank you. Cheers.
Good to see you.
See you next time.